Picture this. You walk into a room. On the table is a pile of chemicals: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. Nothing weird, nothing mystical, just atoms, dust with ambition. Then somebody says, inside that little chemical soup is a language, a code, a storage system, an editing system, a copying system, an error-checking system, and instructions so detailed that your cells can build eyes, skin, blood, fingernails, and a pancreas you only remember exists when it gets offended. At that point, one of two things happens. Either you lean in with awe, or you laugh because it sounds less like mud and more like somebody hid a software company inside a raisin. And that is the shock of DNA. Because DNA is made of chemistry, yes, but chemistry alone is not the whole story. The sequence of bases in DNA encodes biological information, and that information is used through the genetic code to help cells build proteins. That is not preacher talk. That is standard molecular biology. So tonight, we go down the rabbit hole. Not into fantasy, not into lazy slogans, not into "science is dumb, roll credits." No, we are going into the strange borderland where biology starts sounding like computer science, where molecules begin acting like messages, and where the ancient kingdom claim that word creates order suddenly stops sounding primitive and starts sounding disturbingly relevant. Let's go. DNA as code metaphor. Imagine you found a long ribbon made of only 4 letters, A, C, G, T. That is all DNA has to work with, 4 chemical letters. And yet, from those 4 letters comes the recipe book of life. That sequence is not random wallpaper. The order matters. Change the order, and you can change the output. That is why genome scientists and NIH materials routinely describe DNA as carrying genetic information or instructions. Genes are stretches of DNA whose coded sequence directs the making of proteins. Now pause there, because this is where the room gets interesting. A brick is chemistry. A puddle is chemistry. Smoke is chemistry. But instructions are something else. Instructions require arrangement toward function. If I write the letters TCA, GGA, ATC, and tell you they map into a system that helps determine which amino acids get added to a growing protein chain, we are no longer merely talking about matter. We are talking about symbolic assignment inside a rule-governed process. The genetic code uses 3-letter codons to specify amino acids, signal start or signal stop. That is why biologists keep using words like code, translation, transcription, information, instruction. They're not trying to be poetic. They are trying not to lie. Because if something stores instructions, gets copied, gets read, gets translated, and produces functional outputs, the code metaphor is not a sermon illustration. It is a practical description of what is happening. And yes, I know, somebody in the comments is already loading the cannon. Bro, it's just chemistry. Of course it is chemistry. Ink on paper is also chemistry. That does not mean Shakespeare wrote itself because carbon is expressive. The point is not that DNA is non-material. The point is that matter here is organized in a way that behaves informationally. That is the mystery. Not that chemicals exist, that chemicals are participating in a coded system. Which is why DNA keeps making scientists sound like programmers who got trapped in a biology lab. Why information raises the source question. Now let's get more precise. When people hear DNA looks designed, some immediately imagine a lab coat bursting into flames. Relax. Breathe. Nobody is saying scientists do not understand DNA. They understand a lot about how it works. The real tension is not over whether DNA stores information. That part is mainstream. The tension is over how information-rich systems of life originated in the first place and how the genetic code itself came to be. And here, the story gets delicious.
because the origin of the genetic code is still treated in the literature as a major unsolved problem. Reviews on the subject describe it as a central or extremely difficult problem in origin of life and evolutionary biology, with several competing theories still in play: stereochemical, coevolution, error minimization, and others. In plain English, scientists have hypotheses, but no universal final answer. That matters, because once you say information, people start asking dangerous questions. Questions like, why do these symbols map to these outcomes? Why is the code so robust? Why does it tolerate some errors better than you'd expect? Why does the system look engineered for function? In fact, recent work continues to analyze the genetic code as having error-minimizing or error-protective features, conceptually comparable in some respects to error-correcting systems in communication theory. That doesn't prove an intelligent designer in the scientific sense, but it does show that the code has properties scientists themselves analyze using information and optimization frameworks. And this is where the rabbit hole opens under your feet. Because information theory is merciless. It asks, is the pattern carrying a message? Is the arrangement functionally constrained? Could many other arrangements exist, but only a narrow subset actually performs the job? When the answer is yes, you stop talking like you're watching a rock tumble downhill. You start talking like you're dealing with a communication system. And once humans smell a communication system, we instinctively ask for source. That instinct is not irrational, it is normal. If you see sand on a beach, you assume wind. If you see "Welcome home, David" written in 6-foot letters across the beach, you do not say, "Fascinating, sodium chloride dynamics are becoming emotional." No, you infer agency, because the pattern is not just complex, it is specified. Now, science as a discipline is careful here. It describes mechanisms. It studies what is testable. It does not simply leap from informational structure to "therefore God" inside a journal abstract. Fair enough. But outside the lab, in the wider philosophical conversation, the question still stands. Why is life built on coded information at all? That question has not gone away. It has gotten louder. Avoid overclaiming. Now, let's do something rare on the internet. Let's be honest. DNA containing information does not by itself scientifically prove the full theological conclusion someone already wanted before breakfast. That would be cheating. The phrase "DNA is information" is solid biology. The leap from "information exists" to "therefore this specific doctrine is experimentally proven" is not something the data alone can do. And that matters, because truth doesn't need exaggeration. So here is the careful version. What science supports: DNA stores biological information. The genetic code maps codons to amino acids and functions as a rule-based translation system. The origin and evolution of that code remain active research questions with multiple unresolved theories. So no, this is not an excuse to turn off your brain. It's a reason to turn it on. Because once you realize life runs on instructions, you begin to understand why the language of word, order, government, and kingdom keep carrying so much power. Maybe reality isn't just made of stuff. Maybe it's made of stuff that answers to meaning. And maybe that's why your life also changes when it comes under the right word. Not noise, not fantasy, not self-help stickers screaming from a mug. Word, truth, order, alignment. That's how kingdoms function. That's how cells function. And maybe, just maybe, that's why your soul has been starving for more than information. It has been starving for the right voice. If this opened your mind, drop this in the comments. Word creates order. And for the next episode, cells as governments, why every cell looks like a kingdom under authority. Because if DNA is the library, the cell is the city. And that story gets even wilder.